RFP in the future. 122 responses to that, both from industry and from key stakeholders, and that's a pretty strong response when you look at something as important as this. So one of the key elements here is we're doing what we said we were going to do. The last element up there is state consultations. We've currently done 8 state consultations over the past few months. We have another 32 states overall that are ready to go ahead and move forward, and we're continuing to crank those out. And consultation is key because this is public safety's network. To me, these are extremely enjoyable interactions. They're very productive. They're very constructive in the way that public safety has some very unique needs. And making sure that we go to each state and understand the differences. How public safety operates in Montana is slightly different than how they operate in Florida. I know we have Major Burchnell here today from the Florida Highway Patrol, and you know, the issues that we deal with, say, in Texas, in Dallas, are different when it comes to some of the ways that police, fire, and emergency medical services respond. If we look at how EMS responds in Alaska, they're probably more concerned about airplanes in some cases than on roads. Different technologies, different kinds of issues, different kinds of infrastructure. But most importantly, I want to say we're doing what we said we were going to do. We laid out this roadmap. We're moving out with consultations. We're moving forward on the RFP process, and I think that's really, really important. Sustainability. One thing that's important, a lot of folks when they look at the Act, they only look at 1 or 2 elements, but one of the most important things for me is the elements that discuss sustainability in the Act. And it's really important that we look at how do we make sure that every part of this network is built with the long-term sustainability for public safety in mind. How do we make sure that this network is there for the long term for what they need? A couple of key elements that went into it, obviously the planning and grant funding that helps support the consultation effort, that's the $135 million. The $7 billion in implementation funding for the construction fund. For all of you who have watched and tracked what's been going on with the AWS 3 auction, certainly that's a very good thing for FirstNet. A key confidant of mine this morning as we were talking about the results last night, just how far it's gone in the past week, he had the excellent comment of, it's always great when you see your neighbor's home go for a lot more money than you think. Good way to look at it when you look at what's important to get this done. And when you think about, you know, the importance of funding what public safety needs to do and building a network that's going to make a difference, it really is key. Also, one of our main goals is to make sure we keep user fees very low for public safety. Public safety across the country always has different budget struggles, and we want to make sure that we build a network that they can afford to use all day, every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Obviously, industry is looking for how they can support FirstNet as we move forward, and we'll be looking for things that relate to the full gamut, whether it's security, whether it's applications. But most importantly, right now, we're really focused on getting the infrastructure in place for the Band 14 network and making sure that FirstNet can do that while being sustainable. But at the same point, keeping things built to open standards so that as we move forward, we leverage the standards internationally and in the US here to make sure that we have a network that can benefit from all the innovation that continues to occur. We also want to make sure that we're leveraging the funding mechanisms beyond just the initial spectrum sales, that we come together as part of our RFP process to leverage ways to make sure that this network can be maintained and operated as we move forward and keep that low cost and sustainability for public safety as part of our work every day. And that may sound easy, but it's actually more complex than many think. As far as priority preemption and quality of service, this kind of brings me back to my opening point. Public safety is a very demanding customer. Public safety when it comes to quality of service and making sure that when they need to get key data on computer-aided dispatch to respond to a call, when they need key information on the fact that they've had 9 calls at this particular address before and the folks who are there have guns in the home and there's been other altercations with law enforcement on previous calls. This is information that can be life-saving to those who respond. So having the ability to make sure that their ability to get that information into their police car, into fire and EMS responding units, to share that situational awareness is very critical. So when we look at the kind of quality of service for a 24/7 public safety mission, it's critical. Priority. We can all talk about big incidents, even just over the past year or two, what's happened with things like the Boston Marathon and the Navy Yard shooting in DC, where a lot of cellular communications were certainly leveraged. We want to make sure that public safety has the network when and where they need it, and they have the ability to have their commanders and key folks communicate with each other in many different ways. So we continue to leverage our key staff at our Boulder Technical Headquarters, as well as the Public Safety Communications Research Program. PSCR has been critical to what's been going on in public safety communications, and most importantly, in testing all the key elements of the public safety LTE network that FirstNet is going to implement. And I just encourage all of you in the room to continue to support that very important effort when it comes to getting technology, working through integration testing, working through interoperability. It's absolutely critical to the success of what we do. And I want to make sure everyone continues to participate and to understand how important that is as we move ahead. Lastly, there's been a lot of talk over the last year or two about coverage, and public safety looks at coverage sometimes a little bit differently than everybody else looks at coverage. And coverage to public safety is making sure it's where they have 911 calls, it's where they need to respond, it's the kind of fire stations and police stations where they work out of and how do they get from point A to point B. They also look at coverage that they need to understand, areas of high interest. We have parts of the country that have riskier weather conditions, have riskier terrorism conditions, have different things that can happen in very different ways. All of the responses are not necessarily highly developed or high population parts of the country. That makes our problem, I think, a bit more unique when it comes to looking at coverage. We also want to make sure that we're able to build into rural in ways that have not completely been done in the past, and this requires some very innovative thinking and planning and design to make that happen. Also leveraging things like federal lands and other things where there are responses. Think of national parks and emergencies that happen there on a regular basis, and how do we make sure that the communication tools for public safety are also available in those kind of areas. So as we do this, we've started in consultation having a number of discussions on what's really important to public safety, and really looking at where is public safety? How many police officers, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, where do they actually respond across the country? What do they do? We layer that over with population, which is something that certainly from the telecommunications side we're quite familiar with, but we know that's not the only thing. We also look at developed areas versus undeveloped. We look at traffic, and we look at average traffic counts and traffic accidents. One of the great things is DOT has tracked where accidents happen and the severity of accidents. Where are the fatal accidents that are out there, and how do we make sure we provide the high responses to critical incidents that occur? So when you put all that together, you end up with sometimes a different kind of map. And this is not a coverage map, and it's not a coverage map of FirstNet. It's just the fact that it allows us to have great discussions with our public safety stakeholders and the kinds of things that are important to them as we walk through that. So in my short time here this morning, we've covered a lot of key elements to what's happening on the public safety broadband network, and what FirstNet is doing to move with urgency that public safety deserves, what we're doing to leverage current technology and future technology, and what we're doing to build an operable network from day one that really solves a lot of key problems for sharing video, voice, and data with public safety across the country, and how it will instill and inspire innovation, hopefully in ways that we haven't even thought of. To me, I get most excited when I stop by and talk to public safety. This afternoon, I'll be meeting with the Dallas Fire Department. And to me, that's the most rewarding part of my job, because being able to talk to firefighters, for instance, and how they want to leverage technology as they move forward, and what ideas they have that will be most important to this network, is what we can never, ever forget. Sitting around a kitchen table in a fire station with firefighters young and old, and asking them what would they do if they had a piece of computing power in their hand that was connected not only to the internet, but connected to applications that will allow them to save lives in ways they've never thought of before. When you hear the innovation from both young and old on what they would do and what kind of information they have and the excitement that it brings to them. I recently was in the fire department out west, and the most senior person in the room sitting around the kitchen table for the fire crew that was on that day, he was the engineer who drives the fire engine on a very regular basis, and he was thinking, wouldn't it be great to have access to all the traffic information and where all the backups are during rush hour traffic in this very large U.S. city, and to be able to give them better routes, but to do it in a heads-up display where he can see it on the glass of his fire engine, and how he could respond and take different routes without having to get stuck in the traffic first and have to drive over curbs and find ways to get around what's happening. And if you think about it, if you could save a minute, if you could save 2 minutes by having better information to be able to respond and to get to somebody who's having a heart attack, that 1 or 2 minutes is a 10 or 20% greater chance of life, greater chance that that person will survive, that they would be defibrillated after having a heart attack and be able to live. It's a huge amount of difference. And so if by implementing a network like this, we can make a difference, it will save lives. It does not matter if you are supporting FirstNet as a contractor, if you're supporting FirstNet from industry, this program will save lives. This implementation will make a difference in America. And most importantly, I think from the technology side, it's going to drive innovation. If you think of the human factors of what will have to happen in public safety, to think of security as an example. Many years ago, I was a state trooper, and at a very young age, I was given my first patrol car, and it was a 5.0 Mustang, Highway Patrol Mustang. It drove fairly quickly as we went to calls. What's interesting is, I never thought of in those days what would I do to make sure I had authentication and identity and access management to my wireless device, right? And one of the things as we look at this is we need to leverage the greatest tools that are available today to make sure that we have excellent security, but we do it in a way, in a human factors perspective, that will allow law enforcement to keep their eyes on the road. It will allow them to keep their hands on the steering wheel. It will allow them to focus on their mission and instead support them in what they do. And if you think about that, that will have an effect probably on every other human being who uses wireless technology, because we're going to come up with new and unique ways to authenticate. We're going to come up with leveraging ways to give heads-up information and voice recognition and other things for public safety that we can then leverage to the rest of the technology community. So I think it's an extremely exciting time. I'm extremely proud to be part of it. I'm honored to be leading FirstNet as we move forward, and look forward to all of your support as we make this network a reality. Thank you.